How do you measure success? And are the ways that we measure it now becoming outdated? Welcome to HR with Heart. I'm your host, Jemima House. This is the podcast that happens every week on a Monday. It's a short 10-minute episode where we dive deeply into the cutting edge of leadership and well-being. And I leave you with practical tips on how you can make a positive impact in your everyday life at work. So today, let's have a quick look at how do we measure success? What's outdated? What are the new measurements for success? And how do we do that? So let's just say vanity metrics on social media are out. Profit margins alone are out. The algorithm is out. What's in? Depth of connection is in. Our positive impact on other human beings is in. Happiness is in. And guess what? Think of 3 things that HR departments struggle with the most at the moment: retention, engagement, and AI. Now, if there is one word I could use to sum up AI, it would be fake. And yes, it has its uses. And yes, it's only as good as the information that we feed into it. However, in many cases, it seems to be the opposite of genuine connection. If you know anything about me, you know that I used to be a private coach, and my name was the Connection Coach. I would coach women around leadership, around relationships, and about connection and intimacy. So if we are to accurately measure our success in a work setting, then we need to look at how we are defining ROI. So our return on investment, if we look at time as our investment, if you agree that the measure of investment, it does not always have to be money. So your return on investment does not always have to be financial. I'm not saying it doesn't have to be at all. I'm just saying when you make that the only thing, that's when you start running into problems, because businesses are made up of human beings. And if we don't deal first with the human element of each business, we get into trouble really quickly. So, our depth of connection with our co-workers, with the people that we are charged with leading, how do we measure that? Well, the same way as you measure an interaction with somebody in real life, you feel it. Now, this is unpopular in the business world because it's hard to quantify. It's really hard to quantify that felt right or that felt good, because how do you translate that to another human? What does that felt right feel like? Well, when we begin to be mindful about our communication, about the state that we're inhabiting before we communicate and as we communicate, that's when we start to be able to define what good means, what positive means. And we be able to have the bandwidth that allows us to understand someone else's feelings about the interaction, which is non-negotiable. When you're dealing with people, you need to be able to A, self-regulate, and B, have the capacity to understand and translate how someone else is feeling. So there's a phrase in NLP that I really like, which is the meaning of the communication is the response that you get. It took me a while to understand this, but it's basically saying that if you get a response that you are not prepared for, then more than likely you communicated in a way that was not understood by the other person, either because they have a different model of the world or because your communication is lacking, whatever reason. Not to blame or shame, just to understand that when you communicate accurately, you are way more likely to get the kind of response that is positive. Now, if your people are engaging with you in a meaningful way, if they are maybe even referring the company to their friends, I love working here, it's so great. They look after us so well, and I'm really happy about X, Y, and Z. That is the kind of feedback that means something. When you start to abstract results and start to speak about how many conversations did you have, how much revenue did you bring in last quarter, then you start to deny the humanity of the people that are working for you. Yes, those metrics likely are important. However, if the baseline of your people care involves measuring those kind of metrics, then you're setting yourself up to fail. The baseline of your care needs to be how happy these people are in the environment that you call work. And I'm not being Pollyanna here, no. You don't have to be joyful, skipping around Alice in Wonderland happy, but there are certain fundamental truths that need to be met. People's values need to be being satisfied, and there needs to be no contravention of those values within the organisation, and the people need to be cared for. There are certain human givens that have to be satisfied, and these are principles that are universal. So in my ecosystem of ease, these are separated out into 3 distinct categories. One is the self, one is creation, and one is home or environment. So within these categories, there are certain segments, I guess, that have to be satisfied. And whilst it is not only the responsibility of the workplace to make sure these things are true, the workplace does play a role in not contradicting what needs to be true. For instance, let's just take one, and that is psychological safety. If that doesn't exist at work, or if it's questionable, then there are going to be huge problems, because that is a baseline for human well-being. That's just one example. So in order to lead coherently, then we need to be looking at all of these elements and doing what we can to implement them and to measure them within the workplace. And in that way, you can make sure that the mental health of the people that you are charged with taking care of, and the communication between you, and the leadership principles that guide you are all aligned. That makes for a happier team and a happier workplace. I love having these conversations. I know they're not really conversations, but it feels like it to me. So I'll see you same time next week on Monday for another topic. Thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate each and every one of you.